The road to Stardew Valley is a long one. As the bright lights of sea life slowly begin to dwindle one by one, it seems the only thing that even exists in this world is the inner glow of the coach I find myself on. My old life fast fading away, and only darkness on every side of me. I rest my head on the glass and stare forward down the road ahead, because the only light on the horizon is the dawn of a new day in Stardew Valley. There's this fantasy that I have. As I've gotten older, it's become something I think about more and more. It takes on many forms. Sometimes it's about running away into the mountains. Sometimes it's the deep urge to just go lay in a field and look up at the stars, get lost in the everlasting expanse of space. And sometimes it's about packing up my life and moving to a small town where nobody knows who I am, and living a simple, quiet life away from all of my problems. I don't think it should be news to anyone watching this that the farming sim genre has certainly bloomed in gaming's more recent years, and although the genre certainly has roots dating back much earlier, it really started to trend with the release of Stardew Valley. Now, Stardew Valley is a phenomenal game. It's undoubtedly one of my all-time favourites, but I don't think that alone is what caused this sudden boom in exactly this type of game when it did. And I think there's a reason that only a select few of the many titles to come after have managed to hold the same level of success and impact that Stardew Valley did. So the first thing I want to address is positive feedback loops. This is one of the more talked about reasons I see for the success of games in this genre, but I honestly think it's being given slightly too much credit. If you're not familiar, a positive feedback loop is when a game gives you small repetitive tasks that give you a little reward, causing a small dopamine hit. This encourages you to keep doing it, feeding you more dopamine and creating an addictive gameplay loop with constant gratification. And whilst farming sim games absolutely do this, to call this the reason these games have boomed so hard is honestly kind of ridiculous, I think. Because these sort of loops exist everywhere. They're in platformers every time you finish a stage, shooters every time you get a kill, even mobile games like Candy Crush. That's just generally effective game design, and to suggest that farming sim games specifically blew up when they did because of that, it just doesn't add up to me. No, to find out what caused farming sims like Stardew Valley to rocket forwards, we first have to go back, all the way back, to Harvest Moon. Arriving at the break of dawn, I am greeted by the local carpenter and the mayor of Pelican Town. Ready to enjoy the quiet sides of the country, I've shown to my grandpa's old farmhouse where things are a complete mess. Reluctantly, I put on my sleeves and start clearing weeds, logs, rocks. Before I find to make room for a new life to sprout and bloom, I must first clear away the remains of something older. It is no secret that Stardew Valley borrows heavily from Harvest Moon. They're both games in which you inherit a farm that you're tasked with renovating, you have a town full of residents to talk to, and you even have someone who comes by to take crops you've harvested and sell them on your behalf. Even visually, right, it's hard to deny the influence that Harvest Moon has had on Stardew Valley. What might surprise you then is that Harvest Moon never really reached the same heights that Stardew Valley did. The game reportedly sold a decent amount when it came out, enough that it became an ongoing franchise, but it was certainly never deemed a mega hit. The first title in the series received mainly positive reviews, hitting above average scores, and this was with an average of 73% on game rankings, using reviews mainly made years after the game's release in the early 2000s. Something that would likely have been lower in the 90s, I think, when nostalgia bias wasn't really a factor.
Woo! Pointless nostalgia.
In fact, many critics at the time did praise the game for being fun, but always with a caveat that a farming RPG was a hard sell, and the later released Game Boy version was referred to as a lightweight version of an already feathery game. And when it came to Harvest Moon 64, they further downplayed the series with quotes like strangely compelling, and not a game for swashbucklers or diehard city slickers, but for pure RPG fans on the other hand, it's a horse of a different colour. The accessibility and appeal of the series was constantly downtrodden and minimized by reviewers as being for a very niche audience with a very specific taste in games, which is not what you'd expect from a series that inspired a game with review numbers like this. I mean, pretty much everyone I talk to has played this game at least once. Even people I meet who don't really play games enjoy Stardew Valley. So what was it then? I mean, I realised that Harvest Moon's quality as a franchise started to dwindle over the years, but why Stardew Valley? What caused that game to explode and kickstart a trend of farming sims so large that it became a meme to expect at least half of every Nintendo Direct to be full of them? Why did it take 20 years for farming sims to finally blow up? My farmland's cleared and seeds planted, I awake from my first night in the valley. I'm encouraged to get to know the locals, and the small amount of seeds gifted to me isn't likely to last long, so a trip into Pelican Town to introduce myself to the neighbours might not be the worst idea. After stopping by Pierre's, I talked to a couple of the folks wandering around the area. There's Haley, a girl who dreams of life beyond the peaceful comfort of the country. Quite the opposite, in fact, from myself. There's Pam and Penny, a mother and daughter who live in a trailer. Penny certainly seems hesitant to speak much about her life. The same can be said about Pam as well, who seems quite quick to anger. And George, an old man who's clearly frustrated with the toll that age has taken on him. Life in the valley isn't the scenic paradise I thought it would be. There's a whole town here just full of people with problems as real as my own. Stardew Valley and Harvest Moon tell essentially the same story. Your grandfather leads you an old rundown farm and you're tasked with restoring the farm to its former glory. It's a simplistic plot that both games use pretty much word for word. At the very beginning of this video, you saw the introduction to Stardew Valley. Now we're going to watch the introduction to the original Harvest Moon. Now, despite having the same basic plot, there's a pretty stark difference in the games being presented to us here, and I want you to see if you can pick up on what it is. Harvest Moon paints a picture of fun and positivity. It invites you to come on down to mess around with the cute animals, meet some new friends, and come breathe new life into a desolate farm with your can-do attitude and creativity. It's a hopeful story about stepping up to help honour your grandfather and build a farm he'd be proud of. Stardew Valley isn't any of this, because despite its cheery exterior and colourful world, there is an undertone of sadness to Stardew Valley that might be forgotten about pretty quickly by most players, but absolutely leaves a lasting subconscious effect in the way your mind frames the context of the story. In Stardew Valley, we meet a protagonist whose grandfather, on his deathbed, talks of a time when everything will become too much, when the crushing weight of life will become so heavy that they'll need this gift he's about to give them, and to not open it until they reach that point. Immediately, the tone here is pessimistic. Your grandfather phrases this as an inevitability. Life will become too much, you will feel crushed, and you will need this gift. And does the protagonist prove it wrong, defy these expectations? No, they don't. Instead, we immediately jump forward to just that time in their life, surrounded by grey office cubicles and tedium. Absolutely exhausted and indeed crushed by modern life, they open their grandfather's gift, which is, of course, inheritance of his old farm in Stardew Valley. Our protagonist does not go to their grandfather's farm to honour them. They're not motivated to rebuild what now sits ruined, or have fun with all the cute animals. You can tell from your protagonist's reaction upon first seeing the farm that they're disappointed. This isn't what they signed up for. They came here to start again, to run away. They came here to escape. And this frames your first day on the farm as fairly somber. You're reluctantly picking weeds and cutting overgrown grass down. You're trying to make room so you can do something useful with this rundown dump. Something that Robin herself makes sure to point out to you. But all of this sounds like a bad thing, right? A much more depressing premise for a simple farming sim than the bubbly and fun Harvest Moon. I mean, even their title screens are literally night and day. Stardew Valley's is slow and almost melancholy. It's mellow and downplayed. Harvest Moon's is lively, it's energetic and fun. So why am I suggesting that the seemingly more depressing undertone of Stardew Valley is what led to a bigger success than Harvest Moon? Well, that all goes back to a question that I've been constantly asking throughout this video, and that is, why then? Why 20 years after Harvest Moon first released? Why 2016? What was different? I've been in the valley for a number of months now, and it's certainly not the relaxing retreat I was expecting. There's only so many hours in a day and an infinite amount of work to do. Whether it's watering the crops, collecting wood, feeding the animals, or exploring the mines, there's just never really enough time to do it all. Relaxing with a little fishing is normally reserved for the evenings, and I'm lucky if I can even fit in an hour before it's time for bed. And that's without the community efforts that I'm involved in now. Fixing up the community centre, helping the museum fill out its collection, or even just picking up the slack with a bulletin board. It's a lot of work, but strangely gratifying. The only real downside is I don't have time to check in on everyone I'd like to. Haley is starting to take more agency in life and open herself up to the possibility that life beyond what she pictured actually isn't so bad. George has started to open up about his situation and is finally ready to accept that needing help isn't the end of the world. People in the valley are beginning to feel good about themselves. Life in the 90s was very different. This isn't news to anyone, right? But obviously technology was nowhere near as prevalent in people's lives as it is now. We spent on average almost 7 hours a day looking at screens, and back then screens took up our TVs and maybe a computer at work, but that was really it. More people are working multiple jobs now. Inflation is rampant, house prices are through the roof, and maybe most importantly, social media has created a world where there's an expectation about the way others perceive you, and you have so much insight into everyone else's life. Complete strangers in some cases. Opinions in every direction from all walks of life. It is never ending and undoubtedly draining. Life just feels busier now. It's becoming increasingly harder to switch yourself off from the world, to feel truly unreachable. Even when you try to do all you can to avoid it, something is going to come along that forces you to open your phone. Fill out a form online, check an email for a receipt. It's kind of inescapable. It's crushing. There's this fantasy I have that, as I've gotten older, has become something I think about more and more. It takes on many forms. Sometimes it's about running away into the mountains. Sometimes it's this deep urge to just go lay in a field and look up at the stars and get lost in the everlasting expanse of space. And sometimes it's about packing up my life, moving to a small town where nobody knows who I am, and living a simple, quiet life away from all of my problems. This is why I believe Stardew Valley succeeded the way it did when it did. In the 1990s, technology like computers and the internet was exciting. It was relatively new. It was going to make our lives easier. By 2016, a lot of people were starting to feel the pressure of being constantly perceived and the huge mental strain that causes. The desire to go back to a simpler time for a bit was becoming more and more prominent. But that's not an easy thing to just do. I mean, tempting as it sounds, I'm not likely to go learn how to be self-sufficient through farming and run away from all my friends and family just to fulfill this need to not be constantly available and so visible through screens all the time, right? So people found this escape. They found this getaway, this need to disconnect from modern life and this crushing presence of screens, ironically, in a video game. Like our protagonists, we all look for another life sometimes. An easy escape, a reset button. We've all been where our avatar is, fed up with the never-ending status quo and desperate for a change. And that is why this game has left such an impact. Why its more somber and melancholy setup is so much more effective than Harvest Moon. And I think this is what the sudden boom of farming sims following Stardew Valley missed. Because sure, a lot of them sprung up, but not many of them stuck around. Not many of them still have incredibly active communities to this day. They're all just positive feedback loops with none of the soul and connection that Stardew Valley setup provides. But I don't want you to think I'm suggesting that Stardew Valley is just some unhealthy addiction, like a drug used to numb pain whilst we ignore our unfulfilling lives. No, it's not that. It's actually something quite inspiring, in my opinion. It's the day of the Stardew Valley Fair, and things have certainly changed a lot around here. Our progress rebuilding the community centre has meant bridge repairs, debris clearing, and more travel accessibility. The farm is thriving more than it ever was, and I really feel like I am one with the valley now. The difference I've helped make in the locals' lives can be felt everywhere, and the way they've impacted mine certainly can't be understated. They send me food in the mail, resources to help build up the homestead, and have taught me about ways of life I would have never even thought about before. I've even met someone special and asked them to move in with me. We all learn from each other in the valley, because when we listen more, we understand more. And when we understand more, life feels safer. The unknowns slowly start to shrink away, and the knowledge that we have made a choice to arm ourselves with acts as an everlasting road that keeps the journey going. When you open yourself up like this, you're never truly halted by obstacles that life likes to throw your way. I want to once again bring attention to the way Stardew Valley begins. In particular, our avatar's reaction to the farm upon their arrival. They come to Stardew Valley for an easy out. They weren't looking to kickstart an all but abandoned and overgrown mess of a farm. They wanted the quiet life handed to them on a platter, and that's not what they got. Instead, they're presented with a challenge, one that's maybe even harder than their old life. And this goes for pretty much everything that happens in the valley. Nothing is really started from the avatar's own agency. You adopt a pet because someone else asks you to. You investigate the community center because you're asked to help with a rat problem. You give artifacts to the museum because they're looking for donations. And in the grand scheme of things, they really don't amount to much beyond just helping others that need it. But the game drastically improves when you do. The game goes on if you don't do any of these things. And even when you do, it still continues. There's no penalty for skipping any of these. There's no end game for completing them all. You can kind of just stick to yourself and farm and mine and fish your heart away until you're done with the game, but I don't know anyone who plays this way, and I don't think anyone who does gets as much out of the experience as those who do complete all the tasks given to them. Because life in Stardew Valley is what you make of it. Your problems may not follow you there, but you are presented with new, equally challenging ones, and rather than isolating yourself and retreating into the mountains or laying alone in a field, you'll actually find you get more out of your time here if you connect with the people around you. If you are perceived, if you are seen, and if you're taking the time to learn about the vast variety of personalities in the valley and trying your best to understand them and their problems. Because your avatar thrives when life in the valley is filled with friends, neighbors, and relationships from all walks of life. It's what you do with that, the way your avatar finds fulfillment in understanding others and embracing the new challenges they face. That's what shapes their attitude and ultimately their happiness. Is that an overly simplistic metaphor of reality? Yeah, of course it is. But I do think it holds some weight. Escapism fantasies are fine and completely healthy actually, but I do think it's important to be reminded that in reality, you'd only be replacing current problems with new ones. And Stardew Valley does a great job of fulfilling that escapist fantasy, whilst also reminding you that nothing worth doing is ever easy. And no matter where you run, life is only as good as you make it. So surround yourself with good people, people with experiences that go beyond your own. Listen to them, learn new things from the world around you. Say yes more, and don't let any task seem too daunting. You'll usually find that you're a lot more capable than you might think. As I return from a hard day's work on a cold winter's night in Stardew Valley, I reflect on how much life has changed, but also how much it hasn't. What started as an escape from my problems has become a life filled with new ones. It's hard work, watering crops every day. It's time-consuming gathering wood for construction. It's dangerous exploring the mines for all, but the people around me, the friends I've made and the experiences they've shared, they give it new meaning, new context. Every gem I mine is a gift that will make someone else smile. Every seed I buy from Pierre gives him faith in his local business and the fact it can survive against the Joja Corporation. Every piece of grass I harvest is food that will keep my animals happy and healthy. And every one of these people makes my life easier in return. Because problems exist wherever I run to, whether mine or someone else's, but the attitude that I face them with, the willingness I have to open myself up to them, that's what determines how much those problems define me. And if Stardew Valley taught me anything, it's that dealing with those problems head on and embracing the troubles that others face is the only real way to achieve that peaceful life that I've been looking for all along. It's not a need to escape, it never has been. It's a need to feel like you matter, and every single one of us do.